Hello, hello, hello. Hello, hello, hello. All right. Sounds like we are good to go, everyone. I know it's a bit loud, but I'm noticing some things I'm actually a little bit quiet. So welcome to the Yours Truly Baphomet YouTube channel, and we are going on to trip 7. So I stopped for a bit because I had a really gnarly throat ulcer not too long ago, but it's all cleared up. It was weird because I didn't really feel sick. I didn't feel like I had a chest infection. It must have been from strain or something from doing this actual channel, but I want to get back to it, so now I'm here. We are going into trip 7 of Dr. Timothy Leary's High Priest, and we will be, is called, you have to go out of your head, you have to go out of your mind to use your head. So that's very interesting. Heaven and water go their opposite ways, the image of conflict. Thus, in all his transactions, the superior man carefully considers the beginning. Yeah, that's actually quite important when you think about it, because a lot of the time, people don't think about their beginning, because usually what happens when you consider air, for example, it's divisive, and that's why it's usually depicted by the sword, because it shoots things off in both directions. So that's why it's important what you be careful about what you speak, because opposites generate each other, people. Anyway, let's begin. So, it's been a very fun stream so far. I'm thoroughly enjoying it, and I'm glad I decided to read this book on the stream rather than doing it elsewhere. So let's do it, shall we? Once there was a man by the name of Arthur Koestler, who was painted within and without by Hermann Hesse. Whether his Sunday Telegraph manuscript needs any postdoctory remarks may be open to question. I, however, feel the need of adding a few pages, in which I try to record my own recollections of him. What I know of him is little enough, yet the impression left by his personality has remained, in spite of all, a deep and sympathetic one. AK devoted himself to intellectual pursuits. He had given up the novel as a medium of teaching, and had a wide range of knowledge, but not all knowledge was the same to him. Returning to his first profession, he said that any thought was not as good as the other. He preferred science reporting. He loved a certain kind of thinking, confessing to me that psychology was his first love, the profession in which he felt he could make his greatest contribution. He was rewriting an earlier book on creative thinking, and disdained the mystical experience. That's actually quite fair enough in a lot of ways, because unfortunately, when you come across some of the more wooey types in the community, they can really detract from the idea that they think you have to divorce yourself from science and that kind of thing. It's not the point. That's actually half the reason I'm in science in the first place, is that's just my menthol, so that you can marry the two together, because you will understand that once you actually understand what these two are about, they are actually two sides of the same coin, really, mysticism and science. Okay. Insight and outlook is what he called science once in a Franco prison. In 1959, he had visited India in search of truth and meaning. His reactions were typical of the Western rational mind, overwhelmed and flipped out by seething, organic, seed-squalor beauty of this holy land. A trip of India is a full-blown LSD experience, a relentless serpentine uncoiling of unwashed earth tissue. People react to India the way they do to psychedelic drugs. They either flow with it into ecstatic, unsterile union with mythic old life, or they recoil behind sterile, air-conditioned tourist hotel plate glass, screaming for the next airplane to Beirut, or they slog through it unhappily by dutifully making notes, as did Deer, sturdy, sweating, packed mind on back. Arthur Koestler, through his 2 mushroom sessions and his journey to the east. More I Ching. The upper trigram, whose image is heaven, has an upward movement. The lower trigram, water, in accordance with its nature, tends downward. Thus, the two halves move away from each other, giving rise to the idea of conflict. Yep, see? So for this to sort of come to context, the universe is always in homeostasis, and they all sort of split together until there is union, love. And love is commonly misrepresented in the Western psyche. It's not platonic love or sexual love, eros. There is a kind of love when two certain opposites go together and make a third thing of a higher nature, which is supposedly how we actually get back to the Garden of Eden. Love is the answer, not for the reason you think. So, for example, hot, cold, warm, light, dark, universe, good, evil, moral. Get it? So when we say love is the answer, in the more mystical sense, we're not talking about eros and just loving your neighbor and loving indiscriminately. That's not how it works. Love is about marriage of opposites. And that is what it means by love is the answer. Just like North and South Pole are magnetized to each other. Man and woman. That kind of thing. Anyway, I'm getting off track. Let's continue. He wrote a book about the East called The Lotus and the Robot, which was to become quite relevant to the psychedelic controversy. He held a low opinion, which explains the dark expectations which he brought to his psilocybin experiences. He congratulated himself on his rational mind. Oh my God. Dude, the science types ever. He was not really intolerant of religion, although his given name, Arthur, is Sanskrit for the acquisition of power, wealth, or fame. His cells remembered the paternal name. Arthur Kesaya, flying in the air. Arthur Kesava, having long or much or handsome hair. Arthur Koslasa, name of a Raga. Arthur Kohala, author of Saga, to whom the invention of the Soma psychedelic drama is attributed, or Arthur Kosala, Kingdom of India, Golden Age, and Arthur Kalisidasa, Ancient Sage. Fooled by little pills for several centuries, Arthur Kolistar disliked what he saw in the East. While his science embraced nearly everything that existed on Earth that was worth knowing, he said that both India and Japan seemed to be spiritually sicker. The human soul more estranged and to tolerate more speculations on the soul than the West. No, that's a really interesting thought, actually. Because if you talk about how opposites generate each other, now that we're becoming a much more sick society with everything going on around us, more and more people are getting into spirituality and that kind of thing, and we're becoming more spiritual. So maybe sometimes we need a sick soul to have an enlightened soul. Who knew? He said that both India and Japan seem to be Arthur Kolistar was a rational mind, tolerant long before Aldous Huxley found in yoga everything that Arthur Kolistar recognized as superstition, a remedy for our brave new world. Without taking seriously what Schopenhauer called the Upanishads, the consolation of life was profoundly odious and repugnant to him. Alien, uncultured, and retarded people of the first generation of the nuclear age might occupy themselves with solace and Zen. In remote antiquity, when the West groaned under the weight of mental knapsacks, receptivity to the voice of mystical or magical thinking was limited to periods of spiritual emergency. Drugs in the brain. But since the birth of science, to moods of futility and despair, there was no longer any sense in making use of such outmoded self-congratulation and dubious tools. So he said, and so he thought. He travelled in India and Japan in 1958 to 59. When traces of superstition came to the mood of the pilgrim, he became angry like countless others before and felt that he had been touched. Whether the East had any answer to offer, something hostile to our perplexity and deadlocked problems. He was not to be fooled by little pills. It angered him, striking the olfactory note. He found such traces among his own sort, which guided his reactions among educated men conversant with the culture of Asia. The principle of scientific thinking, sober self-control. Self. The sewers of Bombay had been opened by mistake, and nothing was more painful and intolerable to him than the damp heat impregnated by the scandalous notion which lately by their stench invaded the air-conditioned cabin. Oh no. He had sometimes heard expressed and discussed the moment the door of the Viscount was opened by men of great culture. As we descended the steps, the absurd idea that a wet, smelly diaper, scientific thinking around my head, was possibly not a supreme, timeless, eternal, foreordained, and unassailable mode of thought by some abominable joker. The second half of the book, by one of many, was a transient way of thinking, permeated with the stink of Zen, not impervious to change. This irreverent, destructive, poisonous note, a phrase often used in Zen literature, wrong kind. Even Arthur Koester could not deny it, and thus, in a sense, came back impoverished, cropping up here and there as a result of the distress throughout the world rather than enriched. No merit. A rational mind. Like a warning, like a white hand's ghostly writing that his place was Europe in the center of his mind. The more Arthur Koester suffered from looking at this tiny continent, puffing and panting up the steep path, this idea existed from the vastness of Asia and could so deeply distress him while gaining a fresh impression the more passionately his compactness and coherence assailed it, and those he secretly suspected of believing it. Conflict develops when one feels himself to be in the right and runs into opposition. Now that is something incredible. That is definitely true. I think we see it all the time. I started my journey so far, only a very few little pills among the truly educated in sackcloth and ashes, challenging Aldous Huxley, who had openly and frankly defended the drug cult. He came back rather proud, a rational mind professing belief in this doctrine of being a European. It may be parochial pride. An answer. A doctrine seemed destined, but it was not smug. Should it gain in circulation, drugs on brain, different look, sudden effect, wrong kind, no merit, an answer. Power for an Hungarian-born, French-loving English writer. To destroy all spiritual values on earth with some experience of prison and concentration camps to call forth chaos. One cannot help being aware, well, matters had not reached Europe's past sins, that point yet of present deadly peril. The scattered individuals who openly embraced a detached comparison with other continents. The idea, no merit, of the way Europe stood up, still so few in number that they could be considered oddities to its past trial and of its contribution to man's history. Sober self-control. Peculiar fellows. But a drop of the poison leaves one without new confidence. An emanation of that idea and affection for that small figure. Hungarian-born could be perceived first on this side, then riding on the back of the Asian bull. Among the half-educated AKs, portrait of himself could be a small figure, compact and coherent, drugs in the brain. Esoteric doctrines, sects, and discipleships sketched with accuracy. The world was full of the struggle of the European mind and the Asian bull. You know, that's actually seems to be true because when we look at the two major religions of the East, it's obviously Buddhism and Hinduism, and then in the West, it's Christianity, Judaism, and I guess, well, the Middle East is Islam. And there's always conflict in between a lot of them. And usually there was going to be conflict anyway, when we think about it. Anyway. Everywhere one could send his tormented search for verbal meanings, superstition, science, mysticism, Franco-prison, science, Zionism, spiritualistic cults, communism, insight and outlook, other mysterious forces. It was really necessary to combat which science. It was as if a private feeling of weakness to which a generation of post-war intellectuals owed their political liberation have for the present being given free rein. You know, this is sort of interesting because, yeah, as he sort of talks about, one could send his tormented search for. So if some people go through superstition, science, mysticism, Franco, it's sort of the same sort of thing that everyone sort of goes through, and people sort of find their meaning through different ideological concepts. So in incorporeal concepts of philosophy and things like that is how people sort of get their needle and compass and direct themselves. So I first met AK in London in 1959, always haunted by what he termed monumental feelings of inferiority. He called up my aunt, beloved Whittaker's chambers to inquire for a furnished room. Feelings of inferiority. He went one day to the house of one of his friends. He was, in fact, as he called himself, a real wolf of the steppes. Isolated from life by his categorizing mind, it so happened that he had not seen the friend for some time. Hello, Yogi Commissar, arrival, departure. Blanching, he stood motionless for a moment. Lotus robot promised fulfillment. There it was. There he stood face to face with what he feared, endlessly dancing to the old Aristotelian two-step. Certainly, he cried. Of course I know it. Age of Longing at the Twilight Bar, it's mysticism, it's Gnosticism. You look at AK and see the face of Europe's history, into which his life had drifted on account of his disposition and destiny. And how consciously he accepted this, I certainly did not know until I read the records he left behind him. Rational mind. Congratulations! A new epistemology? Is there such a thing? In the haunting eyes and the furrowed-faced skin, this is the way, Irwin replied. On this frail hinge coaster swung the fate of a generation of European political thought. And perhaps you had already taken the most difficult step. O rational mind of Europe, you found by experience Jewish, Hungarian, Austrian, French, German, English, all under one skull. The without can become the within. Great God! What does not stand classified as man or wolf, he does not see at all. The noble arrogance of the self-assigned task. Once Acre had been beyond a pair of antitheses in the Franco cell, he was floating on his back in a river of peace under bridges of silence. It seemed hell to him. He came from nowhere and flowed nowhere. Learn, my friend, it is heaven. There was no river and no eye, for it is heaven that awaits you. Then I had ceased to exist. Behold, this is magic. But not now. He puffs and pants up the steep path going onto the load of mind. I guess it's sort of talking about the idea that you do need to, again, the whole you need to lose your mind before you can be within your mind. So, yeah, parts need to reconfigure. So, in a certain extent, you do need to enter a state of chaotic thought where superstitions and other things can enter your mind, and you got to be careful what you let in. So, there's that to think about. To interchange the without and the within, not by compulsion. In this way, he was always recognizing and affirming with one half of himself in thought and act, what with the other half he fought and denied. His rational mind need not crouch ready to categorize and evaluate every new event, each new experience. Not in anguish as he did, but freely, voluntarily. Your poor mind need not be the fulcrum upon which galaxies turn. Summon up the past. Your frail cortex needs not support the weight of the universe, explaining, ordering, labeling everything that occurs. You know, this is actually a very common thing what everyone does. They need to label everything. If they don't understand it, they need to fucking label it. Or if they can't understand it, they'll say it's gibberish, which is a very common thing for Westoids. Because they don't understand something, they immediately dismiss it. And I think that can happen in other cultures too. I know it definitely happens in Asian cultures to a certain extent. I don't know about Indian, but it's definitely true that a lot of people, if they can't understand something, they tend to shy away from it because it obviously can be a threat to their current ontological model and ways of thinking. So there's that. Summon up the future. Both are in you. You need no longer judge the good and evil of each new flick of cosmic process. Interesting. Until today, you have been the slave of the within. Learn to be its master. If a man is entangled in a conflict, his only salvation lies in being so clear-headed and inwardly strong that he always ready to come to terms by meeting the opponent halfway. You know, that's actually true. Think about it. Because as I was just talking about before, I'm surprised that I was just talking about love and that kind of thing, and how it's actually the marriage of opposites. This is what you do. Because think about like political parties, for example. Republican, Democrat, just as a general example. Usually most of them have something that they both agree with, but there's obviously things that they disagree on, but there's actually a lot more common ground than you might think. And the synthesis of the two should be the normal one, which is usually both free will, because I find it ironic that it's usually alternating between who believes in lack of censorship and free will and freedom and that kind of thing, and it depends who is in more power at the time, Democrats or Republicans. And I actually think that the reason that we have that kind of conflict is people want to be in power and they are scared of the other side. So in other words, in order to shut down any kind of competition or rivalry, people feel a need to open up. Or in this case, if your party's the dominant one, you need to suppress free speech, and you also need to suppress free thought and freedom of expression and all that other kind of thing. Because when the Democrats were in power, it was Republicans who wanted that. But now that the Republicans are in power, it's the Republicans now that want suppression and freedom of thought. So, it's that fear that keeps us divided. Fear not, young Padawan. The heavy weight of rationalism, cruel doctrine of individual will. I, Arthur Coulter, believe in one God, the creator of heaven and earth, one mind, one judicial authority to make 1 billion decisions each second that the planet turns. The billionfold moral judgments. You favor tolerance toward all religions and all political systems. What about Hitler's gas chambers? Fuck. The old Zen monk looks at the tense, alert European visitor and smiles. When you ask these logical questions, we feel embarrassed, said the Buddhist. The Aristotelian intellectual. Tell me, Maria, how can you have fondness for him, a tiresome old logician with no looks, who even has grey hair and doesn't play a saxophone, doesn't sing any English love songs, whose only security rests on his ability to rationalize each new experience? We do that a lot. The Western minds, and particularly people in the intellectual faculties, such as like mathematicians, scientists, and things like that. People need to rationalize everything. How about just freaking sit with it, and it might be okay. Learn to take in the new experience for what it's worth instead of trying to explain it. Like, there's some experiences that I know that I still can't explain, but I live with them because I know that they existed instead of being dismissive of them. Most of that sort instinctively refuse to have anything to do with psychedelic chemicals. Yeah, true. At times, Maria, too, availed herself of Pablo's secret drugs and was forever procuring these delights for me also. A few adventurous or courageous intellectuals had made the psychedelic voyage and struggled throughout the session to impose their minds. Pablo was always most markedly on the alert to be of service to him. Once he said to AK, without more ado, you always try to keep the experience under mental control. That is bad. One shouldn't be like that. The mind is by definition anti-ecstasy. Wow. That is incredible. Anti-ecstasy. The mind is anti-ecstasy. I mean, that is 100% true. Have you seen how fucking miserable some intellectuals are who have to be up here all the time? It's anti-ecstasy, and that's why they're such a drag, and why some people just don't fucking like them. Damn. Try a mild pipe of hashish. The psychedelic session is the final ordeal of rationality. We became friends and he took some of my specifics. The test completed, he wrote his report in the Sunday Telegraph explaining away what his rebellious cortex tried to do to the symmetry of his verbal mind. Once I gave him a drink from 3 little bottles, a mysterious and wonderful draught, and then when he had got into a very good humor, we proposed to celebrate a love orgy. He declined abruptly. Oh dear. When we started our research at Harvard, I wrote to AK telling him about the mystical experiences we were encountering and invited him to participate in a love feast. Brother Arthur, I invite you to a little entertainment for madmen only and the price of your mind. And the price, your mind. Are you ready? An immediate reply, AK was coming to the earth and would like very much to come to Harvard and try the mushrooms. Ah, there you go. A few days before his scheduled arrival, a phone call came from New York, and somber tones AK said that he had already taken psilocybin with a psychiatrist in Michigan and had a hellish paranoid experience. For God's sake, let's snap out of it. He had no desire whatsoever to make the voyage again, transformed into the claws of a predatory bird. Never, no thanks, wrong kind, no merit. He made repeated efforts to walk out of the show. Drugs on the brain, he was powerless against the delusion. Well, why not come up to Harvard anyway and look around and see what we're doing? Agreed. Arthur Koester was an object of interest and admiration at Harvard. The top scholars come to the center to pay homage. A list of appointments was quickly set up. He was quite a ball. A thin, Skinner professor told him that Hindus must be conditioned like animals to give up religious superstition. He felt in his waistcoat pocket the number was no longer there. Miss Jerry Berner with her Brunner left. Is that a typo? I think it's a typo. Miss Jerry Berner with her Berner left hand praised him for the limpid Elasa sparkling in the thick peasant glass. I'd have loved to have danced with you again, he said, intoxicated by her warmth. Later, he worried that Jerry would steal his numbered ideas. The devil was in it for if ever. These failed him, waltzing masked around the Harvard yard, watching AK's charm and alert mind playing at the intellectual game. From all ports, a Gordon dancing girl flung herself into her arms. Dance with me. I can't, he said. I'm bound for hell. The second afternoon, there was an hour free, so I phoned over to the Massachusetts Mental Health Institute to see about arranging a dance with one of the world's top neurologists. Of all the surprises I had prepared for him, this was to be the most violent. For have no man of doubt that it was I who brought the bird of paradise who was delighted to be our host at his special table at the Ritz bar. So far, he said, I have control. That was fine. The schedule was drinks at the Ritz, dinner at the Steel Helmet in Boston with the Frank Barons, and then an evening at the Magic Theatre for AK to observe a psilocybin session run under easygoing supportive circumstances for madmen only. To put on a good mushroom ritual, I had wired up to Charles Olson, our father who art in Gloucester? The giant Olson, genial guru, father of modern poetry. Unfortunately, it is a habit, a vice of his, always to speak his mind, as indeed Goethe did in his better moments. A few years previous, he had retired to a rocky promontory overlooking the harbour whence he served as guide and friend to our work. Olson dominates any gathering with his size, his wit, his intellect, his noble nature, his wise animal energy. He was striving for redemption, but it will take him all his time. He was the person, surely, to introduce Arthur Koester to the open brain and its ecstatic possibilities. On the way, I just want to make sure I'm still that's all good. On the way to the Ritz, AK told us of two dear friends of his, Moses and Jehovah, who had researched mescaline in Berlin during the 1920s. I actually want to talk about that because that's like a weird sense of symmetry there. Like obviously Moses coming down with the tablets from the mountain and that kind of thing. And then you've got Jehovah, obviously Elohim or Yahweh, sort of being the ones researching mescaline. So both sort of being messengers of God in a way, which I find kind of funny. Researched mescaline in Berlin during the 1920s. Their psychedelic sessions kept opening up more and more realms of experience and revelation. Moses climbing Sinai, a gloomy hero in a gloomy wilderness of rocks, and Dr. Jehovah in the midst of storm and thunder and lightning, imparting the 10 Commandments. While worthless friends set up the golden calf at the foot of the Kurfürsten Dam, they tried to tell others about their discoveries, but no one would listen, neither their colleagues nor their families. Mighty Dr. Jehovah and Dr. Moses, with a dark inferior eye and the stride of Wotan, finally got to a point where they could only communicate with each other. I saw them pray at the edge of the Red Sea, flipped out together. They had a rapport and high pitch of understanding, and Handel's wonderful duet for two basses, in which this event is magnificently sung. To the rest of the world, they were hopeless eccentrics. So strange and incredible to be looking on at all this. AK's medical friend suddenly seeing sacred peyote AK's medical friend suddenly seeing sacred peyote writ with its heroes and its wonders, the source in our childhood of the first dawning suspicion of another world than this, presented before a distasteful public that sat eating the provisions brought with it from home. Finally, the social pressure was too great and they cracked under the strain. A nice picture indeed, picked up by chance on the huge wholesale clearance of culture in these days. Jehovah went to Mexico where he died in short time. Moses, with darkened fiery eye and a long staff in the stride of Wotan, went to Munich where he was treated by a monster of a psychiatrist who failed to understand him. My God! Rather than come to such a pass, it would have been better for the Jews and everyone else, let alone the Germans, to have perished in those days. Forthwith of a violent and unbecoming death instead of the dismal presence of dying inch by inch that we go in for today. Quitting treatment, the friend now returned to Berlin and killed himself. Dear. At the Ritz, the neurologist was waiting at his special table. His secretary was with him, and the waitress hovered by solicitously. So far, he said, I have contented myself with turning the heads of ladies. By now, your time has come. First, let's have a glass of champagne. Arthur Colster made a quip about their mutual European background with the psychiatrist, which the psychiatrist avoided. Akai's eyes, wolf of the steppes, narrowed and mild dislike grew quickly to strong distaste. Couldn't stand a person who denies his racial past. A long anatomical argument began. Like two teletype machines, the men, chattering neurology tapes, sank slowly down into a soggy whiskey swamp of sullen generalization. The neurologist, pressed by occultist finny logic, flopped through the undergrowth of swizzle sticks and olives. Poised on an island of potato chips, he denied there was such a thing as a midbrain. AK surfaced to lob a glance of resignation our way. Keep quiet with your questions and chatter, said the neurologist. I'm a professor of theology. If you want to know, but the Lord be praised, there is no occasion for theology now, my boy. It's war. Come on. The Collister's face grew tense. What did you say your name was? He asked the neurologist. And did you ever have a patient by the name of Dr. Moses? No, he remembered no such patient. Moving in like a cross-examiner, AK sketched in more details about his friend, about his problems, his history, his appearance, dark and fiery eye and long staff, and the stride of Wotan. Slowly, the neurologist remembered, oh yes, now you remind me. I do seem to remember treating the case. Treat him, indeed, retorted AK sternly. I saw him pray to God at the edge of the Red Sea. I saw the Red Sea parted to give free passage, a deep road between piled up mountains of water. And by the way, do you have any idea what became of him? No, said the neurologist. I last saw him climbing Sinai, a gloomy hero in a gloomy wilderness of rocks. I was about to ask you if you knew of the outcome of the case. AK briefed heavily. As a matter of fact, he killed himself in Berlin the following year. Oh, that's unfortunate. A sudden quiet settled down over the table. The confirmation classes conducted by the clergy to see this religious film could argue without and as to how the film people managed this. Neurologist puffed quickly at cigar and called the waitress over. A nice picture, indeed, picked up by chance in the huge wholesale clearance of culture these days. Then the Baron arrived. Frank poised and cheerful, and his new wife, Nancy, radiant and bouncing. On and on went their nuptial dance. God knows where the girls got her voice. It was so deep and good and maternal. Obediently I shut my eyes, leaned my head against the wall, and heard the roar of 100 mingled voices surge around me. After another drink, we moved to leave the neurologist. Outside, the air coming off the Boston Common wall was clear and fresh. Clear and flesh. Outside, the air coming off the Boston Common was clear and fresh. We had all escaped from an especially grim mental hospital. Somewhere we heard a door bang, a glass break, a titter of laughter die away, mixed with the angry, hurried noise of motor cars starting up. We felt close together after the ordeal and drove up to the north end for Seaford. You ready? Far up in unhuman space rang out the strange laugh. AK, bubbling with spirit, ordered wines and made a gallant scene with Nancy. When we arrived back at the house, Charles also was in the kitchen leaning over, talking to young Jack Leary, his back to us. I brought AK up to Olsen. The giant poet turned, looked down at the small figure of the novelist and beamed out of his jolly eyes that really were animals' eyes, except that animals' eyes are always serious, while his always laughed and turned into human eyes. Olsen was holding a toy pistol in his hand. After Coulter's eyes went up, to look at Olsen and then dropped quickly to the pistol. He paled and pulled back. There he stood face to face with what he feared. Olsen roaring out genial greetings. Brother Harry, I invite you to a little entertainment for madmen only. And one price only, your mind. Here we go. Are you ready? Coats removed, the group assembled in the study. Why then was Hermione so white? Why was Pablo talking so much? A low built-in couch ran along the two sides of the room. Intersecting at the corner, a large round table strung people out in the form of a circle. Highballs. We planned the session. My friend, I had invited you to an entertainment that Harry had long worked for and which he has long dreamed. Olsen and Leary and Barron and a Harvard graduate student named Lynn were to take psilocybin. The hour is late and no doubt we are all fatigued. Nancy, Barron, and Nuenez and Rona were to attack as ground control. So first we will rest and refresh ourselves a little. AK would observe. From a recess in the wall, I took a quaint little bottle and a small oriental box inlaid with differently coloured woods. We were sitting around the table and the pills were counted out for each voyager. AK had gotten over the shock of meeting Olsen and the toy pistol and was in fine spirits, watching intently. When the last person had taken his potion, AK reached over and said, let me go along too. He took 10 tablets and washed them down with his drink. So he did. Perched on his stool while the dance went on around us to the lively strain of the strings. The ship cast off. We sat listening to the hi-fi. Its effects was enlivening and delightful, light conversation. Olsen was spread out over the couch, center of a giggling, admiring group, as though one were filled with gas. We who had shared the psychotomimetic cocktail session at the Ritz and had no longer any gravity were reviewing the day's events quietly. The soft piece of the mushroom began to descend. Jangled, racing minds began to purr smoothly. Every moment we felt ourselves growing lighter and more serene. The few words spoken were concise Zen koans. Questions answered in the asking. From far away came Pablo's warm voice. A candle flame on the circular table, flickering softly, saying, it is a pleasure to me, my dear Harry, to have a Spanish guitar concerto. Pure notes of thin steel and the privilege of being your host in a small way on this occasion. Olsen played gestural games with a sofa cushion. A quietly circling thread of closeness wove us together. You have often been sorely weary of your life. When eyes met, they sent rays of amused understanding. You were striving, were you not? So here we are, born and dying, a longing to forsake this world and its reality. The incredible accidental chance nature out of our existence, our sharing this quick intersection in astrophysical space-time to penetrate to a reality more native to a world beyond time. The glance of recognition, we love. We all burnish copper atoms, conductive on the same humming wire of energy. We know, of course, where this other world lies hidden. Nancy and Frank Barron were looking into each other's eyes. It is the world of your own soul that you seek. They rose. Nancy laughed and did a swirling dance right in, and then they were gone. Back's ivory ping-pong ball bouncing precise down steel-white tympanic membrane. Only within yourself exists that other reality for which you long. Rona and Lynn giggling fondly at Olsen's mohawk. Such a funny chiefness. AK lost in harmonic nets strung afloat. I can give you nothing that has not already its being within yourself. The room rolling gently into ocean swells of vibration. I can throw open to you no picture gallery but your own soul. Look, he is rewriting an earlier book in a river of peace. We are all burnished copper atoms. Your rational mind need not crouch on humming wires of energy. All I can give you is the opportunity, the impulse, the key. AK's face was now a rich purple, moving in like a cross-examiner. AK's haunting eyes and furrowed face skin were supporting the weight of the universe. Back's ivory ping-pong balls drowning out, his lips moving rapidly. I help you to make your own world visible. That is all. He puffs and pants up the steep path, groaning, but no one is listening. Rona and Lynn, giggling fondly at Olsen's bridges of silence, waterfalls of thin steel notes muffling mine words. Now I will conduct you to my peep show and show you my little theatre. Will you come? Pressure cooker mysticism. AK soundless face began to declaim about the ordeal completed. The mind by definition is anti-ecstasy. There it is again. Just want to take some time to sort of go over that a little bit. I guess a bit more with anti-ecstasy. Because have you just noticed how... I'm just sort of repeating myself how I was at the beginning of this video, but for anyone who might want a reminder or who are only just coming in, anti-ecstasy is the mind, because ecstasy sort of is relished in darkness and earth and that kind of thing. And ecstasy, you can see there's no ecstasy in people who just intellectualize everything. They're dull, they're boring. That whole thing. And I don't mean people who try to be rational and actually ground their findings in mysticism with science. I'm talking about just living life in general. If you try to bring everything to mind, then you're sort of actually missing the whole point of life in the first place. Let's continue. This little theatre of mine has as many open doors in as many boxes as you please. A piece of chamber music played. He was explaining that 2 times 2 is pressure cooker mysticism, but no one listened. Okay, that's interesting. Pressure cooker mysticism. I'm not too sure if I actually completely understand that. Or if it's nonsense, but we'll find out. 10 or 100 or 1,000, and behind each door exactly what you seek awaits you. This struck me as obscene, more so than 4-lettered words. In the beloved Austrian mountain of my school days, it is a pretty cabinet of pictures, my dear friend. A small figure, compact and coherent, soundlessly lectures astride the Asian bull. It would be quite useless for you to go through it as you are. Took us 4 or 5 hours to climb to the 7,000-foot peak. Sober self-control. You would be checked and blinded at every turn by what you are pleased to call your personality. Small, compact figure, Jewish, Hungarian, Austrian, now standing in front of the group, gesticulating earnestly. You have no doubt guessed long since that the conquest of time and the escape from reality, words, it seemed hell to you, came from nowhere and flowed nowhere, or however else it may be that you choose to describe your longing, puffing and panting up the steep path. Rona and Lynn and Olsen look up curiously at the frail cortex, explaining, ordering, labeling everything. Meaning simply the wish to be relieved of your so-called personality, no merit. There he was, face to face with what he feared, an American writer whom he otherwise liked. That is the prison where you lie, drugs on the brain. AK breathed heavily, the virtue of sweat and toil. You are therefore requested to be so kind as to leave your highly esteemed personality here, where you will find it again. In making use of such outmoded self-congratulation and dubious tools, my soul was steeped into cosmic schmaltz. Be as jolly as you can. Wrong kind. The virtue of sweat groans under the load. To teach you to laugh is the whole aim. What is he talking about? Questioning glances. You feel quite well, I trust. Zen enlightenment seemed the ultimate profanation. Not afraid? That's good. Excellent. Come, dear compact figure. Join the thread of closeness weaving us together. Reproach of artificiality. Huxley. Gesticulous face cut out of the cardboard. You will now, without fear and with wonderful pleasure, enter our visionary world. You Americans. Drugs on the brain. American efficiency, shortcuts, cosmic awareness. You will introduce yourself to it by means of a trifling suicide. Their intersection in astrophysical space-time is different from those who arrive by motorcar. Wrong kind. We are in a magic theater, a world of pictures. So I again walked out of the show by forcing my eyes to open. I congratulated myself on my sober self-control. A rational mind not to be fooled by a little moment of truth. Oh, that's... I think Leary's taking the piss out of AK there. It's like, I'm not going to let the truth fool me to my rational mind. See that you pick out beautiful and cheerful ones and show that you really are not in love with your highly questionable personality any longer. Yeah, the shadow, we almost try to fall in love with it in a sense, and we cling to it. And obviously this is what AK is doing with it quite a bit here, clearly, on this trip. I wish I shouldn't be fucking yawning on this, because this is interesting, but it's probably not as great as some of the other ones that I've read from Leary so far. But it might get better, so let's continue. Good night. AK waved, face crinkling and parachial pride. He left the room. For madmen only, long moments followed the departure. Back's stringed clock ticked song of the planetary motion. In dead silence, he was gone. Fearing a return of Michigan paranoia, I followed after. Knocked softly at his door. Baron's merry voice shouts, "Come in." Baron, in Arthur Collis's room, entered. This grammar is fucking me up, man. I hate it. Anyway, I was greatly cheered at finding that I could escape from that cursed wolf world and went in. Baron jolly. We didn't know this was Kay's room. We just fell into the first room we saw. Kay came in to go to bed. You should have seen his face when he saw us. I kept repeating to myself, but these are nice, friendly people. They are your friends, and so forth. Was he upset? No. I'd say startled. Very apologetic. Where did he go? Don't know. Backed out muttering forgiveness. Checking guest rooms down the hall. Arthur. Knocking softly. Arthur. I still knew him well enough, and he still bore a faint resemblance, and yet he had grown a few centuries older. Yes? Is it you, Pablo? Come in. Where are we? AK was in bed, giggling, radiating pleasure. Hi, we are in my magic theater. Sailing high, but I'm bound to say, Harry, you have disappointed me a little. Life is a song. Life is beautiful. Life is the golden dream of a lotus princess on a bed of lilies. You forget yourself badly. The next morning when I woke him up to start the round of Harvard appointments, AK sat up in bed. Those pills last night didn't affect me at all. You broke through the humor of my little theater and tried to make a mess of it. In times of strife, crossing the great water is to be avoided. Okay, so this is an I Ching thing. Let's start. So let's read this and break it down maybe. In times of strife, crossing the great water is to be avoided. That is, dangerous enterprises are not to be begun, because in order to be successful, they require concerted unity of forces. Conflict within weakens the power to conquer danger without. There you go. A nation divided shall surely not stand. And this is true with the human mind as well. If you have not reconciled all your own conflicts and internal prejudices and biases and things like that, you will fail. And in fact, but also at the same time, we also need to know when we have done that. So when strife is about, we need to sort of do it as soon as possible. And you can't really do anything or achieve anything until you've had psychotherapy. Psychotherapy is probably the biggest thing that people need to be doing in particular. If they want to succeed at all in life. But unfortunately, a lot of the time, this same thing is hijacked quite a lot. You know, like with some of the institutions, like I'm not too sure if they're doing it on purpose. I don't think the students and the psychiatrists are doing it on purpose, but it's definitely directed in such a way that no problems are really solved. It just gives them other coping mechanisms and actually might leave them worse off. So there's that to experience. The next evening on the way home, AK bought 2 bottles of French wine, chosen with care, a flask of scotch, and gently from behind clenched teeth, asked, "And if I do not submit?" We sat in the library starting to work on the whiskey. K held up his glass and shook it with an icy tinkle. "And if I deny your right, Mozart, to interfere with the Steppenwolf and to meddle in his destiny, I'll stick to my drug. Alcohol is a social stimulant. It warms you up, brings you closer to people. Mushrooms are non-social. They whirl you inside, bring you closer to yourself. Give me alcohol any day." Damn. "Oh dear, Arthur, I'm bound to say I thought you had learned the game better." Next day, as we walked into the airport building at Loganfield to see him off, AK made his final comment. "You must admit that these drugs cause psychosis, a temporary psychosis. I'm bound to say, Harry, you broke through the humor of my little theatre, a benign and educational psychosis, if you will. Would you say it's therapeutic?" "Therapeutic, of course. That's what the effect should be called. Instant mysticism, temporary therapeutic psychosis." That is such an interesting term. I didn't think about hearing that. So losing your mind is actually not necessarily bad. So, and some forms of psychosis are actually a little bit therapeutic. I know this from experience. But I think this is why, like, there's this god Dionysus is such a huge point of, like, god of madness and revelry and abandon, because it's actually quite therapeutic to engage in some form of revelry and some form of abandon, whether it be through drugs, sex, and a bunch of other things, through art. And purely intellectualizing your existence is just AIDS, to say the least. The metal ramp was wheeled away and the metal door closed. 4 motors roared and the huge metal Four motors roared and the huge metal magic bird lumbered down the concrete strip. There he went into the aluminum box. Did he understand Pablo? Mozart had a glimpse of his magic stirred his reason. Would he sample its torture once more, traverse once more the hell of inner being? Would he one day learn to laugh? Would I? Pablo was waiting for us both, and Mozart too. I drove back to Harvard and went by Frank Barron's office to tell him about my disappointment. Why hadn't we been able to turn on Arthur Koestler? Frank pulled at his chin thoughtfully. Koestler was lonely last night. Koestler is a man, and a man needs a woman. Everyone else at the session had a mate. He was left out. Behind all the psychology and science business, there are basic issues of life which you have to take account of. If you ignore them, you'll always be disappointed in your sessions. God and sex are always with us. You know, with that in mind, God and sex are always with us. I think that's because we seem to underestimate just how much sex is such a profound part of our being. And we, in a sense, know it's sacred. But it's one of the most elusive subjects about psychology of sex, because it usually drives so many of our decisions, especially the younger generation or the more damaged people who haven't resolved anything, which then extends to the parents. It's very Freudian, but I do think Freud was sort of onto something about that whole thing about being about sex, even if he was a coke addict and a bunch of other things. I think Freudian psychology isn't completely off, so we'll continue. Frank Barron's wry comments focused on an aspect of the psychedelic experience that I wasn't ready to come to terms with. It was becoming glaringly obvious that extraordinary sexual energies could be released. Wow. You know, that's actually a really interesting thing that he's talked about, because I had a huge problem with my sexuality, I'm not going to go into the full details of it, but I've largely reconciled it through psychedelics alone. Can't really do it through discipline and all other kinds of things. And I do believe when you sort of, I guess, have astral sex with the universe in the mental space, you can resolve that. And if you are, in a way, engaging in coitus with your purpose, so for example, with my purpose, I guess, no, I'm not going to fucking talk about that. But if you know what your purpose is and you're engaging coitus with it, you can discharge. Otherwise, it just gets pushed below the belt. So what do you do when you've got no purpose? Usually people look at for other means, drugs, sex, and much other things. You should transcend that baseline instinct of just having it for pleasure. Not to say don't do it for merely pleasure, but I actually think Eros, now that I'm thinking about it, is one of the greatest mysteries that I've ever come across, because it's not really it's really interesting, Eros. Like, I'd probably actually start to look into more of it now that I'm thinking about it, because it's actually definitely a huge part of it, of our being, and we ought to actually look at that. But I'm not going to tell it for everyone, because everyone's so uniquely different in this space that I don't think it's really worth looking into it. Anyway, Frank Brown's comment, folks, well, it was becoming glaring obvious that extraordinary sexual energies could be released. Frank was right. God and sex are two central beats of the dance. The mind muffles and disguises the reality of the tune. Blow the mind and you are left with God and life is sex. Damn. Blow the mind and you are left with God and life is sex. This was obvious in my first trip to in Mexico. Languorous, Mandy melting, and the deep lingering of the Cherokee princess, Betty. Whenever trouble appeared in a session, it meant isolation from God and mate. The confusion could always be calmed by prayer or loving fleshy contact. The raw, electric, shuddering sensitivity of the psychedelic experience. We were dealing with a powerful aphrodisiac, probably the most powerful sexual releaser known to man. The effect was sensory. Contact was intensified, thousandfold, but also deeper. The union was not just your body and her body, but also your racial and evolutionary entity with all of hers. It was mythical mating, neurological union, cellular sex, archetypes merging. It was the direct reliving of thousands of matings. She was an insect queen buried deep in the damp tunnel of the anthill, humming with genetic energy, and you burrowed down dark to find her. She was a bird of plumage, trembling in the thicket for your feathered embrace. She was a taxi dancer from Alexandria. The psychedelic drugs exploded sex right off the pages of Playboy into new dimensions of union that my mind wasn't ready to handle. And what was more awesome still was the after effect. You came out of a session with changed emotions. New attractions and repulsions developed. There was the session with the graduate student couple. He wandered around murmuring ecstatically about his new insights into space, time, and meaning. She lay by the fire with her arms over her head, murmuring his name. When he ignored her, her soft eyes moved around the room and her body twisted in search. She looked at me and smiled. Then she unfolded and swam toward me. Her husband was standing looking out the window. Her husband, his wife, now she was all woman, receptive earth. Tomorrow she would be reincarnated as a pretty graduate student. I retreated behind the couch. After their second session, they separated and she married the man whose image she brought back from her psychedelic trip. It was almost inevitable that the guide of the session would be seen as God and lover. When the mind is suspended, you project on the calm person who had turned you on all the attributes of divinity and eternal malehood. We called this process of new attraction and repulsion re-imprinting. The person you turned on fell in love with you or never wanted to see you again. I never met Arthur Colser since his trip. Allen Ginsberg has been my soul brother since his trip. In the first 2 months of our Harvard psychedelic research, 7 women followed me home, much as the baby ducklings followed Conrad Lorenz and announced their love. For many reasons, I was not ready in 1961 to face the sexual potentials of psychedelic drugs. I was awed and confused by the sexual power. It was too easy. I was too much an Irish Catholic, too prudish to deal with it. Too Western Christian to realize that God and sex are one. You know, that's actually true. Because God is androgynous and is sort of beyond gender and sex. But that also means God is sex, in a sense. Because in order to create this universe, there had to be a third thing of male, female, the male principle, the female principle, married together to create the universe. So God is essentially this manifestation of sex magic in a large respect. So, and I think, hold on, I just sort of realized something, guys. Because since Keter is attributed to air, when it's the divine fire, but like it's in the middle pillar. And then I'm just drawing a very, very bare bones tree of life here. And then you have Malkut, which is amicable to air. But then you have the Virgin Mary and Christ, which could just be seen as a fool as Jesus Christ, or Dionysus, who was also born to a virgin earth mother, Semele, and Dionysus is commonly attributed to air. So, think about that. All right, let's continue. Where were we? Okay. 2 Western Christians should realize that God and sex are one. That God for a man is woman. That God for a man is woman. That the direct path to God is through the divine union of male and female. That's actually a really interesting point too. I didn't even complete the sentence, so I think also we need to, so the highest form of God, I guess, when we think about it, for the respective genders is like the opposite. So God for a man is woman, and for a woman, God is a man. And I think that's why if you look at the damage done based on respective, so like women, I've noticed, will have a lot more trouble dealing with their father issues, and a man will have much more trouble dealing with their mother issues. And I think that's where it all comes from. And that's why it's so hard for both of us to sort of work through it, especially if you've come to the idea that like if you've like grown up with a mother that hates you and you're a boy, then like you just think God hates you and like you, and then you forsake the world in a sense. And I think it's the same thing for a woman who's despised by a father. So keep that in mind, I guess. Besides, I was still involved in being a scientist, too weighted by the duties and responsibilities to enjoy the newly opened paradise. I was too much an intellectual. I wanted to understand before plunging in. I felt a moral obligation to Harvard University, a good place on this dark planet. How could I enjoy the ultimate sexual sensual experience in my study and square it with my scholarly position? How could I be consumed by ecstasies undreamed of by Oriental kings and return to my Harvard Square office the next morning? Damn. It was there, this tender garden of divine bliss, and I was voyaging towards it. But while I held my Harvard position, I held to a self-imposed ridiculous renunciation. I didn't turn on with the slim brown model. I was the Arab girl, leave with questioning regret in her black eyes. I gave mushrooms to the honest, soft Joan, which she used to turn on one of her suitors whom she married. I let the Cherokee princess drift away, clothed in a leather facade that yearned to be moistened. Fuck. My sexual yoga was to start in 1964. after I learned to come to my senses with holy marijuana. After I listened to and learned from my tantric guru with the Siva tire skin, after I dropped out of Harvard and psychology, resurrected my body, and moved on the journey to the east, beloved Arthur, forgive my clumsy in no sense, forgive our isolating theater set. Make your next trip up the mountain with Shakti, and the two will be one. Damn, have we just gone to the end of it? Conflict. You are sincere and are being obstructed. A cautious halt halfway brings good fortune. Going through to the end brings misfortune. If further one to see the great man, it does not further one to cross the great water. Don't know how to feel about that one, because, yeah. I think it's just referring to, like, again, if you're... It's probably... a cautious halt halfway brings good fortune if you realized that you might have fucked up and you need to integrate and that kind of thing and recalibrate. Anyway, people, that is the 7th trip. That was also... They always get good towards the end, I've noticed. Like, because obviously I think that's when the lesson is learned, and while that's sort of talking about people's backstories and things like that. And I think that's a big part for me, actually, because I've been thinking about Eros and how it's actually one of the greater mysteries that we don't really give much mind to, you know? Yeah, so there's something else for me to study too. I can never stop learning. Anyway, guys, thank you so much for watching the Yours Truly Baphomet podcast of the Dr. Timothy Leary High Priest reading. I will see you next time. Don't forget to like, comment, share, subscribe, and turn on your bell notifications. Bye for now.